There's a kind of attention that doesn't ask permission. It lands on you before you even realize it. And when you do realize it, it's too late to pretend you don't feel it. She only brought me my mail. But there's one particular night I can't stop going back to. A night where nothing happened, and that's exactly what changed everything. If you've made it this far, I think this story is already a little bit yours too. Subscribe to the Another Flame channel right now. I'll tell you the rest carefully. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening to this from right now? There's a version of me that existed before this winter that I prefer not to think about too much. Not because it was tragic. It wasn't. It was just exhausting. The kind of tiredness that doesn't show on your face but lives in your shoulders. In that place just below your neck where you carry things you don't know how to name. I was 36 years old and I felt like I was living in slow motion while everyone around me was going at normal speed. The apartment was new. Not new in the sense of happy new, in the sense of a fresh start, which is a different kind of thing. Boxes still half full in the third month. Books out of order. A cup of coffee in the morning that I forgot to drink because I stood by the window looking at the street without really seeing anything. That's how I started noticing the sounds in the hallway. Footsteps. The specific sound of a door closing carefully, not carelessly. And then silence. And then, sometimes, soft music. The kind of instrumental music you put on when you want company without needing conversation. She lived at 4B. I had never really paid attention before. You know how it is in apartment buildings like that, where the proximity is physical but the distance is social. You learn not to look too much. To greet each other endlessly. To exist in the same space without truly inhabiting the same place. But during that period I was more receptive than usual. Things came to me more easily. The afternoon light in the hallway. The smell of something cooking 2 floors below. And her, the way she climbed the stairs without haste. As if her destination wasn't urgent. I didn't know her name yet. I knew that when her door closed, something tense inside me would become a little less so. It didn't make sense. I know it didn't. But exhaustion makes you like that porous, receptive to small things that at another time you would have let pass without registering. And I was so tired that even the silence of another person seemed. I know it was Tuesday because I had a work call that went badly. The kind of meeting that ends and leaves you standing in front of your computer, turned off, staring at the reflection of your own face without quite recognizing the expression that's there. I went downstairs to get the mail. Barefoot, wearing the same t-shirt I'd had for 2 days, my hair tied up the way you do when you don't want to think about your hair. She was in the lobby, not doing anything special. Just holding her phone waiting for something, an Uber maybe, or a message. She had that way of waiting that some people have, which isn't anxious. It's just present, as if the moment of waiting also had some value. She looked at me and said he. I said hey back, and that was it. But on the way back to the apartment, climbing the stairs with the envelope in my hand, I realized I was still thinking about the way she'd looked up from her phone. Not with the curiosity of a stranger, something quieter than that. Recognition, perhaps. As if I were already familiar in some way I couldn't explain. I dismissed the thought. You do this, you know. You have these moments of unsettling clarity and you immediately organize them into safer categories. She seems nice. Nice neighbors are good. Next. But the following week she knocked on my door. I was holding 3 envelopes, my name printed on them, mistakenly placed in her mailbox. She said she owed me these since Tuesday, that she'd forgotten to bring them earlier. I said it wasn't a problem. She said she knew, but still. I was left holding the envelopes after she left. The paper was still slightly warm from her hands. I stood in the middle of the room for far too long, wondering how something so simple could take up so much space. Mail returned. Less than a minute of interaction. Nothing that justified how the apartment seemed slightly different after she Left as if the air had shifted and I was still trying to adjust to its new version. I opened the envelopes. They were bills. Completely ordinary bills. I went to make coffee. But I still had this feeling that something was wrong. A meeting that's going to go wrong. I feel it in my shoulders before I even hear the tone of the other person's voice. A friendship that's falling apart. I feel it in a tightness in my chest weeks before I can even put the thought into words. My body knows. It takes me a while to hear it, but it knows. And it was the same with her too. We started crossing paths with a frequency that seemed improbable for a building of that size. In the hallway, in the laundry room, at the corner store. Each encounter was brief, cordial, without any apparent weight. But my body registered each one in a way that I didn't yet know how to categorize. His breathing slowed slightly when she appeared. Posture changing without conscious decision, neither opening nor closing, just adjusting. Like when you enter a room and realize the temperature is different from the hallway, and your entire system recalibrates without you asking. There was one afternoon at the laundromat that still haunts me. Her washing machine had finished, but she hadn't yet returned to pick up her clothes. And when she showed up, I was folding my things on the counter next to it. The laundromat is small, 2 buildings share it, and on weekdays it's almost empty. She apologized for the delay as if I were affected by her lateness, which was obviously irrational, but I understood the social instinct behind it. He said everything was fine. She stood there beside me, taking the clothes out of the washing machine. The distance between us was, 2 hand spans, normal for the space. And I continued folding my things as if it were a task that required all my concentration, which it obviously wasn't. She smelled of something slightly citrusy. Dish soap, probably. But there was something else underneath, something warmer, more personal, the kind that doesn't come from any product. I said something about the weather. She laughed a little and agreed. And I left with my folded clothes in the basket, wondering why the palm of my hand was slightly warm, and why the apartment seemed smaller than usual when I entered it, and why I stood in the kitchen for a while, unable to remember what. I was in the middle of nowhere, not working, not resting, just existing in that in-between state that late afternoon produces when you're alone and have no energy to start anything new. And then the lights went out. I stood there in the dark for a second, processing everything. I grabbed my cell phone, used the flashlight to find the candles I knew I had in some drawer that I hadn't opened since I moved. I found 2. A lighter that worked on the 3rd try. I knocked on her door without thinking much. I don't know exactly what she was looking for, company perhaps. Or just a reason to leave the apartment that didn't seem desperate. She opened the door with a lit candle in her hand. She was more organized than me in those details, and didn't seem surprised to see me. "I knew you were going to show up," she said. Not in a way that presupposed an intimacy we didn't have. More like someone who carefully observes patterns. I asked if I was bothering him. She stepped away from the door in response. Her apartment was different from mine. Same layout. But she had inhabited the space in a way I hadn't yet managed to do with mine. Plants on the windowsill. Books in stacks that seemed to have their own logic. A blanket on a leather armchair that was clearly more worn than any armchair should be. We stayed in the living room with the candles, and she made tea because the stove was gas and it worked, and we were quiet for a while, the kind of quiet you only get when the silence doesn't need to be filled. She asked me how I was doing. "No, what do you do for a living? Or how are things going?" She asked at how was I doing? That's a different question. It presupposes that there's something to overcome. That she had paid enough attention to know that there was a crossing underway. I didn't know what to answer immediately. And she didn't wait for me to answer. She just passed the tea and turned her eyes to the window where the rain was beating down. And it was the kind of kindness that demands nothing in return, the kind you receive and are left not quite sure where it came from. I imagined it would be If it ever happened to me, some revelation with background music, some clarity that arrives like light after darkness. But it wasn't like that. It was a completely mundane moment. I was making coffee one Saturday morning and realized I was thinking about her. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but it was the first time I had let the thought finish instead of cutting it off in the middle. She was 25. I was 36. She lived on the other side of a thin wall, and if I was quiet enough at certain times, I could hear the muffled sound of the music she played while she worked. She had returned my mail. She had given me tea during a storm. She had asked how I was doing with the tone of someone who really wanted to know. And I was thinking about her while making coffee one morning when there was absolutely no reason for her to be on my mind. I sat with my cup and stared blankly into space for a while. It wasn't gratitude. I know gratitude, the kind I feel for the therapist who helped me get out of a bad relationship, for the friend who helped me move the boxes into this apartment. Gratitude has a specific texture. It's warm and clear and doesn't occupy the space that this feeling was occupying. This feeling lingered in my chest in a different way. It was in a deeper, quieter place. The place where the things you don't say out loud stay waiting. I didn't ask myself if it was right or wrong. I didn't jump to judgment. I just observed for a moment the way you observe something you found and don't yet know if it's precious or dangerous. She was 25 years old. I was 36, with an apartment that was still half finished, and a weariness that wasn't just one kind. I drank the coffee. I washed the cup. I went to take a shower and stayed under the hot water longer than necessary, thinking that if I simply didn't let the thought take full form, it might. I had gone out for a walk. The kind of aimless walk you take when your apartment becomes too small to contain everything inside you. I returned later than planned, and she was at the hallway door with a piece of mail in her hand, mine, once again, put in the wrong mailbox. She handed it to me. I thanked her. And then neither of them left. There was no decision made about it. Neither of us said anything. Let's stay here for a second. We just stayed there. She was wearing her indoor coat, barefoot in the cold hallway. I was outside with my scarf still wrapped around me. She asked where I had gone. I said I had only walked. She nodded as if it made perfect sense. And then she said quietly, the way you say things you're not completely safe saying out loud, that she did that too. Sometimes when she needed to breathe. I looked at her. She was looking at me. It wasn't the look of a neighbor being polite. It was another kind of look. The kind that goes a millimeter beyond what's strictly necessary, that lingers a second longer than the situation demands. And I know looks like that. I know them from my own life. From moments when I myself cast them without realizing I was casting them. She knew. I knew that she knew. And the hallway became so quiet that I could hear the sound of the building's heating, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. My own breathing, which I noticed, was a little shallower than it should be. I said goodnight. She said goodnight. Her door closed with her usual care. And I stood there in the hallway for a moment, holding the envelope with my name on it, unable to. She had made soup. She had made soup because she was doing it anyway. And she made more than she needed, and she thought of me. She told me this with a naturalness that somehow made it all the harder to process. As if bringing me soup was an obvious thing, a logical continuation of something, I let her in. We stayed in the kitchen because that's where you go when someone brings food, sharing the bowl, the spoon, the bread I had on the counter. She talked about her work, about a project that was exhausting her, about how she hadn't slept properly all week. I listened. I do that well, listen. It's one of the things I learned to do before I learned to talk about myself. And then she stopped mid-sentence. He looked at me, and he said, "Are you okay?" It wasn't about education, it was something else. It was the kind of question that comes from a place you've built, not from a conversation, but from a series of accumulated moments. From shared silences, from carefully closed doors, from storms and tea and returned mail. I opened my mouth. And I almost said it. I came so close to saying, not the whole truth, not a confession with grand words, but something true. Something like that. No, I'm not completely okay, and part of it has to do with you, and I don't know what to do about it. But what came out was, I'm getting better. She kept looking at me for another second, as if she were almost saying something too. And then she nodded, slowly, and went back to the soup. And we stayed in the kitchen for another hour, talking about completely different things, with that unspoken phrase between us resting on the counter like an object neither of us knew about. My sister lived a 4-hour drive away in another state, and I owed her this visit since Christmas. It was a practical reason, a necessary absence, but I left with relief. And I left feeling guilty for feeling relieved. Because I knew without needing to explicitly state it that I needed distance to understand what was happening inside me. You can't see something when you're too close to it. I needed perspective. I needed days that didn't include the specific sound of her footsteps in the hallway. The way she brought her tea to her lips. The way she said my name when she saw me, with a slight accent at the end. As if my name had a texture she was exploring. I went for 10 days. My sister is loud and warm, and she fills every silence with conversation and food and movies and plans for places we never actually go. It was good. It was the kind of good that distracts. But on the third night, I was in the guest room staring at the ceiling, and I thought of her with a clarity that surprised me. Not like longing. More like presence. As if she had occupied a space within me that remained occupied regardless of where I was. I sent a short message. He said he was traveling and would be away for a few days. He suggested that if the mail arrived, I could leave it under the door. She replied, "Okay, take care." 2 dots, a comma. The right verb. I stared at the message for longer than it deserved. And then I put my phone aside and listened to my sister giggling at something on the TV in the next room. And I tried to let that sound bring me back, ground me in something. From afar, it becomes a thought. And thought is harder to ignore because it has no physical form, no schedule, no respect whatsoever for the moment when you are trying to do something else. I returned after 10 days with my suitcase and the same question on my mind. The apartment smelled like the apartment, of my soap, of the plants I had finally bought in February, of the leftover coffee from before I left that I had forgotten to throw away and which was now in a state of existence that I preferred not to investigate closely. I packed my bags, cleaned the kitchen, and put the laundry in. I deliberately became a mechanic. To keep my body occupied so my mind wouldn't have to work. But when I went to sleep that first night back, I heard her sound in the hallway. Footsteps, the door, the click of the lock, and my whole body relaxed in a way I hadn't realized I was tense. That scared me more than anything else up to that point. It wasn't desire, or it wasn't only that. It was something more like orientation. Like when you're lost in a strange city and you recognize a familiar street. A feeling of, here. Upon arrival. I was following her example without having chosen to do so. I stayed awake for a while thinking about all the versions of myself that existed before this winter. Before this apartment, before her. Trying to remember what it was like to wake up one morning without having someone specific on my mind, even before having coffee. I couldn't remember very well. And what's even stranger, part of me didn't want to. Not all at once, in a gradual way, that transition that happens in places with real seasons, where you wake up one morning and realize that the air has a different quality. Lighter, less heavy, as if the world had finally expired. I started opening the windows. I started going out more. Having coffee sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, looking out at the street, feeling the early morning sun that wasn't yet hot enough to bother me. I was feeling different, not resolved, but less tense. As if I had stopped holding my breath without realizing it. And she appeared more often these days. Not in a way I could describe without sounding like I was paying too much attention, which I was, but that's another matter. It's just that good weather makes people go out more, be more present in shared spaces. We'd cross paths in the hallway in the morning, her with coffee in hand, me still without. On the street, sometimes going in different directions, she was different too. More open. Or perhaps I was more open and that made everything more permeable. One afternoon I was on my balcony and she was on hers. The balconies are separated by a concrete divider. It's impossible to see the other person without leaning in an unnatural way, and I heard the sound of pages being turned. She was reading. And I continued drinking my coffee knowing that she was less than 2 meters away from me, separated by a concrete wall, and that impossible proximity was at once comforting, and the most difficult thing too. She spoke first. I said my name. That's all. My name with that slight accent at the end that I had tried to ignore. I said no. She asked if I had returned safely from the trip. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since I'd returned. And the question was simple, it was the neighbors. Words, but I heard something else beneath them that I couldn't quite make out. We went down the stairs side by side. A hallway wasn't made for two people to walk side by side, so we stayed slightly closed the whole time, our arms almost touching. And we walked down the street with the late afternoon sun, which at this time of year is horizontal, hitting everything from the side, making everything seem slightly different from how it is in the morning. The cafe was almost empty. We grabbed a table in the corner, ordered and sat quietly for a moment. The kind of quiet you only feel when you're comfortable enough not to feel the need to fill a void. And then she said, "I want to ask you something." I looked at her. She was looking at the cup. Then she looked up. And there was something in that look that I recognized because I had sensed it from my perspective for months, a question that doesn't yet have words, that is forming in a place prior to language. She said, "You are better than when you arrived." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. But she kept waiting, which turned it into a question anyway. I said yes. That I was feeling better. She nodded. And then he said, more quietly, "I'm happy." I used to be worried. A pause. Like you. 2 extra words. Which were all the words. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to say that she had been a part of it, the best and the hardest, the warming and the turmoil. I wanted to say that returned mail and tea in the storm and unannounced soup and take care, those thoughts, punctuated by commas, had accumulated inside me in a place I didn't know existed before. But what I said was, "Thank you for sticking around." She smiled. And it was the most honest smile I'd seen in a long time, not one of relief, not one of politeness, but one of recognition. Of something that had reached its destination without needing any more words than those. We stayed there until the cafe closed, talking about other things, and the conversation was light, long, and good. And when we got back to the building and went up the stairs and stopped in the hallway between our doors, she said goodnight with that accent on my name that I stopped trying to pronounce. I had woken up early for no particular reason and stayed in the kitchen slowly making coffee, listening to the building waking up around me, the noise from the floor above, a distant dog, the street beginning to fill with sounds. And then, footsteps in the hallway. Slow, recognizable, the soft click of her lock. And then, for the first time, a knock on my door. Not urgent, gentle. The kind of knock you give when you're not sure if the person on the other end is awake and you don't want to scare them. I opened it. She had 2 cups. Coffee. Already brewed. She said, "I know it's early, but I saw light under your door and thought." He didn't finish the sentence. I picked up one of the cups. I let her in. We sat by the living room window watching the street wake up, each of us with a coffee in hand without saying much. The sun was that typical Sunday morning sun pale, without any urgency yet. As if the day hadn't quite decided what it was going to be either. At some point, her shoulder brushed lightly against mine. That's all. A brush the kind that could be an accident of distance or a choice. And sometimes we prefer not to resolve that ambiguity because ambiguity is safer than any definite answer. I didn't walk away. That's how it is. With the coffee cooling in my hands, her shoulder against mine, and the street below completely oblivious to anything that was or wasn't happening up here. And there's this detail that I can't get out of my head. She had brought the right cups. Not two identical cups, she knew which ones were mine. My favorite, the blue one, with the slightly crooked handle. She had been here enough times to know. She had paid attention to such a small detail that I myself sometimes forgot. That's what remains. Not a kiss, not a confession, not a declaration with grand words. The right cup, the shoulder to lean against. The light under the door at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning that she had noticed and chosen not to ignore. I still don't know what we are. But I know she brought the right cup. And it's been a long time, a very long time since I felt so. There are more stories like this waiting. If you're still feeling that sensation in your chest, the next video starts exactly where this one ended. Not in words, in feeling. It's waiting for you.